and welcome to the CCDA podcast. I'm Troy Jackson. I am the executive director of Undivided and have been part of CCDA. I think my first conference was 1996 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So I've been around for almost 3 decades and am delighted to host today with my friend, Reverend Traci Blackmon. Reverend Traci is a pastor, a leader, an organizer, is leading an effort called Faith Out Loud. And there is no better preacher in the United States of America than Reverend Traci Blackmon. It is great to have you here, Reverend Traci. I wonder if you could give us a little bit of your background.
Wow. Well, thank you, Troy. It's always a joy to be in space with you. A little bit about my background. I often say that I don't just work in communities, I belong to them. I'm a pastor by calling, an organizer by necessity, and a public theologian by conviction. So, for much of my ministry, I've served at the intersection of faith and justice in public life because I've come to believe those things are never meant to be separated. Whether I was serving in Ferguson, working alongside congregations across the country, or now helping lead Faith Out Loud, my work has always begun with one question: what does love require of us in this moment? So I don't believe transformation happens because someone flies in with answers. It happens because neighbors organize and institutions become trustworthy and churches find their prophetic voice. So that's the community I'm trying to help build.
That's great, Reverend Traci. And today we're talking about election protection, democracy. I know you've been in the work of justice and leading in local communities for a long time. I first heard your name and started hearing you on regularity around Ferguson, where you were pastoring at the time. But is that how you got involved into the work, or is there a broader story you'd want to share of what your entry point was?
You know, I didn't choose election protection. I feel like election protection chose me. I came into this work because I kept encountering people whose lives were shaped by decisions that they had little voice in making. And as a pastor, I could preach hope on Sunday. But by Monday, I was standing with families affected by failing schools and inaccessible health care and environmental justice and predatory lending, and the list goes on and on. And eventually, you begin to ask yourself some deeper questions. So, who decides these policies? Who gets heard and who does not? Who gets left out and who gets put in? And you quickly discover that voting is not the solution to every problem, but when communities lose meaningful access to the ballot, they lose one of the primary ways they can shape the conditions that they live in. So for me, election protection is simply another form of pastoral care.
That's good. And that term, election protection, could you define that a little bit? When you hear that term, what do you think of, or how would you describe it?
Yeah, sometimes when people hear election protection, they assume we're talking about partisan politics. And perhaps sometimes we are, but I'm not. Election protection is making sure every eligible voter can cast a ballot should they choose to, and have that ballot counted accurately and participate without intimidation and unnecessary barriers or confusion. And I remember back in maybe 2012 or so, I was helping organize Souls to the Polls in Missouri, in St. Louis area in particular. And we had all these trainings with people about how to engage this work in a nonpartisan way. And one of the testimonies I carry with me from that moment is a young man who we trained. We had a whole phone bank, and he'd come in from taking a client who had vision impairment. And he said, "Pastor Traci, I had to put it to the test today. I had to put it to the test today." And he had tears in his eyes, actually. And he said this person asked him to go into the polling booth with him because he couldn't read the ballot. And he would read the candidates, etc. And then the person he was driving would tell him who he wanted him to vote for. And he said, and this person didn't vote the way I wanted him to vote. And, I knew he couldn't see the ballot. So I was really tempted. He said, but I didn't, because it matters that everybody's voice is heard. And that just stayed with me, right? And so it's not about partisanship for me. It's about helping people navigate all the changing rules that are happening. It's about helping train poll chaplains and volunteers. So any kind of threats, real or imagined, are mitigated at the polls. It's about making sure elders can get there. It's about helping voters understand their rights. And it means supporting election workers who I believe faithfully administer elections. And at its heart, election protection is just about protecting public trust, because democracy doesn't survive simply because people can vote. It survives when people believe their participation matters.
Yeah, it reminds me of James Weldon Johnson's poem, Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Yeah,
Democracy should be to lift every voice, and let's sing together to make this a better community and better nation.
I love that.
That's
I
part.
love that,
Yeah,
Troy.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, why should we're talking at CCDA? We're talking to people who do community development, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
asset-based community development, doing amazing work in preschool and housing and transitions for folks coming out of prison and folks leaving addiction and employment creativity and all sorts of things happening at the grassroots level.
Mm-hmm.
Why should folks committed to community development care about voting access?
Well, first I want to say I am familiar with CCDA, and for a long time, they've been not just a player in that field, but a model in that field. And I have always considered the work that CCDA does as ministry. Community development has always been more than buildings, it's about human flourishing. And you can build affordable housing or create healthy food systems, improve schools, or reduce violence and strengthen neighborhoods. But if the people living there have no meaningful voice in the decisions affecting those neighborhoods, then the development remains incomplete. So throughout Scripture, God continuously asks, how are the people? In all kinds of stories, God is concerned with how the people are. Not simply how's the economy, not simply how are the institutions, but how are the people? I was preaching about that yesterday. And voting is one of the ways neighbors help answer that question together. For Christians, civic participation is not about winning elections. It's about loving neighbors enough to help shape communities where everyone feels seen and can flourish.
I love that contrast of elections not or voting is not about winning elections, but loving neighbor well.
Mm-hmm.
Great, I love that. How is protecting the right to vote and the ability to vote? How is that connected to the long-term flourishing of lives, of families, of neighborhoods, and even our nation?
Well, and this is where I live, right? I long for us not to do episodic work, but for us to do long arc transformative work. Healthy neighborhoods don't happen accidentally, and they don't happen with one election. They're built through sustained participation, and every decision we make about schools or transportation or parks or healthcare or even clean water is influenced by people who are chosen through elections. So when entire communities are underrepresented or discouraged from participating, then their needs become easier to overlook. And, I want to say that overlook is not always intentional. It's that you are more familiar with the environment that you live in, which is why we need diverse representation, because we all have our own stories. So protecting voting rights isn't just about election day for me. It's about whether neighborhoods have lasting influence over the future they're trying to create, I often say democracy isn't something that we inherit, it's something we steward, right? And it's our responsibility as people of faith to steward well. And that means making room for everyone.
Mm, love that. Making room for everyone in our democracy. What concerns you as you look at the world as it is in 2026 about our current landscape when it comes to election protection and voter rights?
Well, there's the obvious answer that you hear everywhere, but my greatest concern isn't simply changes in election law. It's really the erosion of trust, of civic trust. History teaches us that before rights are restricted, confidence has to be undermined. Um, the disruption of trust precedes the policy change. People begin hearing that elections can't be trusted and institutions can't be trusted and neighbors can't be trusted. And once distrust becomes our default, then democracy becomes easier to weaken. At the same time, we are seeing increasing complexity with new rules and shifting procedures and misinformation spreading faster than truth. And sometimes these rules are not coming because there is evidence that the rules are needed, but they are based in the fear that is being fueled with this mistrust. I have been thinking a lot, Troy. As a matter of fact, it might be something we could partner on. I've been thinking a lot about putting out a message thanking our election workers and our poll workers and reminding them that they are facing extraordinary pressure, but that we trust them, that we believe them, that we believe that people do this work because they care. And I mean, they're not doing it to get rich. And some of them have been doing it election after election after election, right? So these realities require more engagement from communities of faith and not less. More engagement that looks like faith, that looks like us reminding people that we trust the poll chaplains to accompany people safely. We trust the election workers to administer elections fairly. We trust the system to work the way the system is supposed to work. And most of all, we trust the people to care enough about democracy that they're not going to violate it. The church has always been called to be a source of truth and courage and steady presence. And this is one more moment to live into that calling.
It's a great reminder, Reverend Tracy, when I go to vote a few miles from my house, the folks that are working in that polling location are my neighbors.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
what does it mean to love our neighbors well? I love this vision of how do we let poll workers and everyone who works in the elections coming up this fall and frankly every year, primary in general, we see them, they're our neighbors, and we're called to love our neighbors and thank them for what they do. I love that vision. I
Yeah.
know earlier this summer, you were part of a very large, quick mobilization in Alabama
Hmm.
following a decision on voting rights. And I wonder if you could just describe what led you to go to, I believe it was Montgomery
Hmm.
and maybe Selma as well, and how people responded and what was the message of that gathering. And again, it was a rapid response gathering around voting and elections.
Well, there were many responses, and most of them were that we are not going to take a disruption in the voting process laying down, that we are going to fight for the protection of our elections. But the most impactful piece of that for me, Troy, was that we convened clergy to begin in Selma and not Montgomery. So Montgomery started 3 hours later, but at 8 o'clock in the morning, we convened in Selma to pray together. And we prayed um, multiracially, we prayed interfaith, we prayed multi generationally. And it was true that there were no campaign speeches. It was just one person after another praying for this moment, praying for this nation. It was incredibly powerful. And I was surprised that even Congress people showed up at 8 in the morning to pray with us. They didn't have anything to say, they weren't on program, just to pray, right? And so many denominations were represented. And even though that was on a Friday, we had representation from our Jewish neighbors as well. We had representation from our Muslim neighbors, and we had about 8 people join us for prayer who had done the original Bloody Sunday March that were still alive. I was so moved in that. I don't exercise, Troy. You're always on a walking machine. You convict me. I'm working on it. I'm trying to get me a Peloton now, but I'm not in the best of physical shape like that. And I was so moved by that hour of prayer that when they said we were going to walk to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which was about a mile and a half from the church, I started out that walk just purely fueled by spirit. And then halfway through, the spirit ran out, and I was then fueled by shame of these older people who were still walking, and I was huffing and puffing. So I think that the message of that march, for those who only went to Montgomery, and certainly for the faith leaders who came to Selma, is that we're in this together. It wasn't a black march, it wasn't a white march, it was just people who care about democracy. And it was so successful that we got calls to do the same kind of prayer visual revivals all over. And that's one of the tasks that Faith Out Loud is taking on. So we're having replications of those prayer meetings in all the cities that we are serving in this moment.
That's beautiful. And if for those listening, if you've never been to Selma, Montgomery, my friend and co-founder of Undivided, Chuck Mingo, talks about it as the Holy Land in the United States, where just the saints and the blood they've shed and the witness and example of leadership is so poignant there. And Edmund Pettus Bridge, where blood was shed for the right to vote, is a
Absolutely.
powerful, not just image, but reminder for us. So, Reverend Traci, a last question. What would a healthy, faithful culture of civic participation look like in our communities today?
Oh, Troy, a healthy, faithful culture of civic community for me would look like rich and thoughtful and accurate discussion and debate about issues without personal attacks, without character assassinations. It would look like less lobby money coming in to throw off balance the voice of people. It would look like politicians being public servants called to answer in community for the decisions that they make. It would look like people running from inside of communities and not outside of communities. It would look like integrity. It would look like I am a person of faith. Faith matters to me. I don't want to be governed by someone else's relationship with God, but I do want to know that people are governed by a moral compass that includes a command for dignity for all people. And that's what it would look like to me. I don't do election protection because I worship democracy. I don't. I do election protection because I worship a God who insists that every person bears divine divinity. And any society that takes dignity seriously must also take participation and engagement seriously. So that's what I wish for. I wish for more freedom to vote, and less obstacles, maybe I should say, to voting. There are people, I preached at Ebenezer Baptist Church yesterday, and in the
Which is, just for clarity, that's where Dr. King grew up
where
and,
Dr.
and
King grew up,
came
and
to
where
town.
Senator Warnock is now pastor, though he's on sabbatical. And yesterday seemed to be family reunion day, Troy. And one of the families that was present was the family of Emmett Till.
Oh my goodness.
And the one surviving member of that family who witnessed Emmett Till being kidnapped was in worship yesterday. He's 85 years old. He doesn't live in Atlanta. They just came there because they were having their family reunion. They came as a family. And I've been sitting with that all morning, that because we live these rapid lives with news news alerts coming every day, history looks far away. But history was just yesterday, right? And so it just did something to me. And I don't know why it's causing me to remember it in this moment that, a time when voting restrictions were used to quell fear was just yesterday. Was just yesterday. And there are still people alive today who have already counted jelly beans and who've already read and read and read and who've already had to recite the preamble to the Constitution and who've already had to prove with many documents that they deserved a voice in this country. It was just yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah, I read a book earlier this year called The Invention of Yesterday that has this line that the present does not deserve the authority it enjoys,
Oh, that's
which is
a powerful line. Who said that?
his last name is Ansari, Ansary, a historian. But he basically says we always think today is the worst it's been or we're going off a cliff, but we have to remember. That story of Emmett Till's family member, probably his cousin, being there in worship yesterday is just a powerful reminder that we are standing on the shoulders of those who have gone before. Reverend Traci, if someone wants to follow you, follow the work of Faith Out Loud, how can they do that?
Sure. Well, Faith Out Loud has a website, www.faithoutloud.org. Very simple to remember. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Threads. I'm on Instagram. And it's always by my name. And I welcome conversation with anyone who wants to have conversation. We also have a podcast on Faith Out Loud that CC Jones Davis runs called Just People Talking on a Podcast. And that's about reaching across the aisle with people who may have different ideologies, but who claim the same God. And so having conversations in a way that is civil and respectful, to hear one another's side, and so that we don't forget to be human in the process. Now, Troy, when
So,
this podcast is over, you have to text me the name of that book because now I have to read it.
oh yeah, our mutual friend Rami suggested it to me. It's called The Invention of Yesterday, and
Okay.
it is long. It is long. It is a 50,000-year history of the world.
Wow.
So be ready. But it'll be good maybe for some late summer reading. Well, thank you so much for listening to the CCDA podcast. Thank you, Reverend Traci, for joining us today. If you want to learn more about CCDA or the Faithful Witness campaign that Undivided is partnering with CCDA on, you can get involved. You can check out the show notes in this episode. It's faithfulwitness.us to find out more. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. The episode is produced by Sarah Collin in association with Christina Four. And we'll be back soon with another episode featuring CCD practitioners who are committed to seeing people in communities experience God's shalom. And just so you know, this is Troy Jackson. I am not running for Senate in Maine. This is not a partisan effort in any way. Same name, different people. I'm coming to you from Ohio. It's great to be here. Thanks, Reverend Traci, and thanks, CCDA.
Thank you.